Some mornings are meant to change everything. James just didn't know this would be one of them. The elevator doors slid open with that familiar mechanical whisper, revealing the sterile brightness of Manhattan General's 7th floor. James Alexander Walker III adjusted his charcoal suit jacket, the fabric perfectly tailored to his athletic frame, and checked his Patek Philippe, 9:47 a.m. Right on time, as always. His leather shoes clicked against the polished linoleum as he made his way toward room 712, where his college roommate Marcus lay recovering from emergency appendix surgery. The antiseptic smell of the hospital mingled with the faint trace of his cologne, creating an oddly personal atmosphere in such an impersonal place. "Excuse me, sir?" A nurse with tired eyes and scrubs decorated with tiny teddy bears approached him. "Are you here for the maternity wing? The Evans family?" James paused, his hand halfway to Marcus's door handle. "No, Oh, my mistake. You just have that new father glow," she said with a knowing smile before hurrying away toward the elevator. "New father glow?" James ran his fingers through his dark hair, dismissing the comment. At 35, he'd mastered the art of controlling his image, his emotions, his entire world. Fatherhood wasn't on his carefully constructed timeline. Not anymore. He pushed open Marcus's door, but his friend was sleeping. IV dripped steady beside the bed. James settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair, pulling out his phone to check emails from his hotel empire. 3 new properties in negotiation, a board meeting Thursday, investor calls scheduled through the weekend, numbers, contracts, predictable outcomes. The language he spoke fluently. A soft melody drifted through the thin hospital walls. Someone was humming a lullaby, the tune hauntingly familiar. James found himself listening, his fingers pausing over his phone screen. The voice was gentle, tired, but filled with a tenderness that made his chest tighten with an emotion he'd buried years ago. "Hush now, my babies. Mama's here." His breath caught. That voice. Without thinking, he stood and walked toward the door, drawn by something he couldn't name. The humming continued, interwoven with the soft sounds of newborns stirring. He stepped into the hallway, following the melody like a man walking through a dream. Room 708. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap he could see her profile. Pale skin, honey-colored hair falling loose from a messy bun, wearing a faded hospital gown that had seen better days. She was cradling something small and precious against her chest, swaying gently, in the morning light streaming through the window. Mary Louise Evans, the woman who had vanished from his life 5 years ago without a single word of explanation, the woman who had haunted his dreams and hardened his heart, the woman he'd convinced himself he was better off without. She was here. She was real. And in her arms, "Mrs. Evans?" A nurse appeared beside the bed. "Time for the baby's feeding. All 3 of them are getting hungry." 3. James gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white against the painted metal, his perfectly controlled world tilted on its axis as the nurse handed Mary another baby, then another. 3 tiny bundles, each with wisps of dark hair, each making soft mewling sounds. Mary whispered something to them, her voice thick with exhaustion and love. She looked different, older, more fragile, but with a strength in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Life had changed her, shaped her into someone new, just like it had changed him. "Mr. Walker?" Marcus's voice called from behind him. "That you out there, man?" But James couldn't move. He watched Mary kiss each baby's forehead, watched her count, tiny fingers and toes with the devotion of a woman who had waited a lifetime for this moment. Evans. Her last name was Evans now. And those babies. Those 3 perfect, innocent babies. The timing. The hair. The way she disappeared. The realization hit him like a freight train, stealing his breath and shattering the careful walls he'd built around his heart. Those weren't just any babies. They were his. She felt his presence before she saw him, like a storm gathering just outside her window. Mary's fingers tightened around baby Noah's tiny hand as she sensed someone watching from the doorway. After 5 years of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at every shadow that resembled his silhouette, she'd developed an almost supernatural awareness of James Alexander Walker III. "Mrs. Evans, you're shaking," whispered Nurse Patricia, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been Mary's anchor through the difficult delivery. "Are you feeling all right? Should I call the doctor?" Mary's honey-colored eyes remained fixed on the 3 sleeping bundles arranged around her hospital bed. Noah, Isabella, and tiny Sophia, her miracles, her reason for breathing, her beautiful secrets that had kept her awake for 5 years. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just tired." But she wasn't fine. She could feel him there, could sense those piercing blue-gray eyes that had once promised her forever before his world decided she wasn't worthy of it. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. "He can't be here. Not now. Not when I'm this vulnerable." "Mary?" Her name fell from his lips like a prayer, like a curse, like everything in between. The same voice that had whispered, "I love you," in the darkness of his penthouse. The same voice that had called her name that final night before she'd made the hardest choice of her life. She closed her eyes, drawing strength from somewhere deep, inside. The same place she'd found the courage to work double shifts while pregnant, to deliver 3 babies alone, to build a life from nothing but determination and love. When she finally turned toward the doorway, James stood frozen like a man who'd seen a ghost. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his beard meticulously groomed, but his eyes held the same devastation she remembered from that awful night 5 years ago. "Hello, James." Her voice was steadier than she felt, colored with the quiet dignity she'd earned through sleepless nights and endless struggles. He stepped into the room as if walking on sacred ground, his gaze moving from her face to the babies and back again. She watched him do the math, saw the exact moment when realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question, his voice cracking on the words. Mary lifted her chin, every protective instinct in her body flaring to life. "Are they what, James?" "Mine." The word came out raw, desperate. "Are they mine?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside the window, Manhattan hummed with its usual chaos, car horns, sirens, the endless symphony of a city that never stopped moving. But in this small hospital room, time seemed suspended. Mary looked down at Noah, whose dark hair caught the morning light exactly the way James's did. At Isabella, who had inherited his stubborn chin. At Sophia, whose tiny fingers curved in the same graceful arch as her father's when he was thinking. "Their names are Noah, Isabella, and Sophia Evans," she said finally, each word deliberate and carefully chosen. "They're 5 days old, they're healthy, and they're everything to me." She hadn't answered his question, and they both knew it. James moved closer, his expensive cologne mixing with the antiseptic hospital air. "Mary, I need to know." "You need to know?" The words came out sharper than she intended, years of suppressed anger bleeding through her carefully maintained composure. "You need to know what exactly? Where I've been? Why I left? Whether the babies you're staring at like they're puzzle pieces belong to you?" He flinched as if she'd slapped him. "I searched for you. For months You searched where?" Mary's voice rose slightly, causing baby Isabella to stir. She immediately lowered it, stroking her daughter's cheek with infinite gentleness. "In the penthouse restaurants, the charity galas, the country clubs where people like me aren't welcome unless we're serving drinks? That's not fair." "Fair?" Mary almost laughed, but it would have been bitter, broken. "Tell me about fair, James. Tell me about fair when your father threatened to destroy my nursing license if I didn't disappear. Tell me about fair when I had to choose between fighting for us and protecting these babies." The color drained from James's face. "My father? What did he—" "Mr. Walker." Nurse Patricia returned with bottles and fresh blankets. her cheerful demeanor faltering when she noticed the tension crackling between them. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize Mrs. Evans had a visitor." James straightened, his CEO mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "I'm an old friend, actually," Mary said quietly, her eyes never leaving James's face. He was just leaving. But as James turned toward the door, little Noah chose that moment to open his eyes that were the exact same shade of blue-gray as his father's. And in that instant, Mary realized that some secrets were too powerful to stay buried forever. The coffee in the hospital cafeteria tasted like regret and burnt hope. James sat at a corner table, his untouched cup growing cold between his hands as he stared at the sterile white walls. 45 minutes had passed since he'd walked out of Mary's room. 45 minutes of replaying every word, every glance, every heartbreaking detail. My father threatened her. The thought circled his mind like a vulture, picking at wounds he thought had healed. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over his father's contact, then shoved it back into his pocket. Some conversations couldn't happen over the phone, especially ones that might end with him destroying everything his family had built. "You look like a man who just discovered the world isn't what he thought it was." James looked up to find a woman standing beside his table, early 30s, beautiful in a fierce way, with copper-tinted natural hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through him. She wore scrubs decorated with cartoon elephants and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd fought battles and won. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" Tasha Brooks. She slid into the chair across from him without invitation. "Mary's best friend, birth coach, and currently the only person standing between you and a very tired new mother who doesn't need any more stress in her life." James studied her face, recognizing the protective fire in her expression. "She sent you to talk to me? She doesn't know I'm here." Tasha leaned back, crossing her arms. "But I've been watching you sit down here for the better part of an hour, looking like you're about to either cry or punch something. And since this is a hospital, I figured I'd better intervene before you chose the punching option." Despite everything, James almost smiled. "You don't pull any punches, do you?" "Life's too short for pretty lies." Tasha's expression softened slightly. "Besides, Mary's been through enough hell without adding a breakdown in the cafeteria to her list of things to worry about." "Tell me about the hell." The words came out rougher than he intended. "Tell me what my father did to her." Tasha studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether he deserved the truth. "You really don't know, do you?" "I know he threatened her nursing license. I know she left because of him, but I need to understand. 5 years ago, Mary was 6 weeks pregnant." Tasha's voice was quiet but steady. "She was scared, excited, planning to tell you after she figured out how to say it without sounding like she was trapping you. Then your father showed up at the hospital where she worked." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What did he say?" "That a working-class nurse from Brooklyn had no business ruining his son's future. That he'd already done background checks on her family, her finances, her entire life. He had documentation of her mother's struggle with addiction, her brother's juvenile record, things that could be twisted to make her look unfit to raise children." The cafeteria noise faded to a dull hum. He had lawyers ready to challenge her custody, James. Papers prepared to have her declared an unfit mother before the babies were even born. He offered her money to disappear, and when she refused, he threatened to destroy her career and take the children away legally. James's hands clenched into fists on the table. All those months of searching, of wondering why she'd vanished without a word, and it had been his father all along. His father, who'd raised him to believe that family was everything, who'd taught him that loyalty and honor were the foundations of their success. She was 27 years old, pregnant with triplets, and facing the most powerful family in Connecticut. Tasha continued. "What would you have done?" The answer was simple and devastating, exactly what Mary had done. "Where did she go?" "Detroit. She had a cousin there, someone your father's investigators hadn't found. She worked as a night nurse, lived in a studio, Apartment the size of your closet, and saved every penny to give those babies a chance at a normal life. James closed his eyes, imagining Mary, his Mary, alone and pregnant in a strange city, working herself to exhaustion while carrying his children. The image nearly broke him. "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered. "Why didn't she trust me to fight for her?" "Because she loved you." Tasha's voice was gentle now, almost kind. "She knew that if you found out, you'd declare war on your own family. She'd seen how much pressure they put on you, how hard you worked to live up to their expectations. She didn't want to be the reason you lost everything. So instead I lost her. Instead you both lost each other." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years of miscommunication and manipulation settling between them like fog. "The babies," James said finally. "Are they? Noah has your stubborn chin. Isabella has your eyes when she's concentrating. And Sophia?" Tasha smiled despite herself. "Sophia has your habit of gripping people's fingers like she's making a business deal." The confirmation hit him like a physical blow. 3 children. His children. 5 years of bedtime stories, first steps, scraped knees, and Christmas mornings. All of it stolen by his father's cruelty and his own ignorance. "I want to see them again," he said. "I figured you would." Tasha stood, her expression serious once more. "But understand something, James Walker. Mary built a life from nothing to protect those babies. She's not the same girl who used to look at you like you hung the moon. She's stronger now, harder. And if you hurt her again, if you walk into her life and then disappear when things get complicated, I will personally make sure you regret it." James met her fierce gaze steadily. "I'm not going anywhere." "We'll see." Tasha headed toward the elevator, then paused. "Room 708, but give her an hour to rest first." "And James?" "Yeah?" "Bring coffee. Real coffee, not hospital sludge. She hasn't had decent coffee in 5 years." As Tasha disappeared into the elevator, James pulled out his phone again. This time, he didn't hesitate before dialing his father's number. Some conversations couldn't wait any longer. The call to his father would have to wait. Duty came knocking in the form of Marcus's groggy voice. "James? Where the hell have you been, man? I woke up expecting to see your ugly face and found nothing but get-well cards from my secretary." James stood outside the hospital's main entrance. Manhattan's afternoon chaos swirling around him like a living thing. Yellow cabs honked at pedestrians who crossed against the light. Hot dog vendors called out their specials, and somewhere in the distance, a street musician played saxophone with the kind of passion that only came from having nothing left to lose. "Sorry, Marcus. Something came up." James rubbed his temple where a headache was building like thunder before a storm. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone used my gut for knife practice, but the morphine's taking the edge off." "You sound, weird though. What's going on?" James watched through the glass doors as families moved through the lobby. New fathers carrying car seats, elderly couples supporting each other toward the elevators, children clutching balloons and looking simultaneously excited and terrified. Normal people living normal lives unburdened by the weight of corporate dynasties and family secrets. "Do you remember Mary Evans?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're Mary? The nurse from that charity thing?" "Dude, that was years ago. Why?" "She's here, in this hospital." "No shit? What are the odds of that? Is she okay?" James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything Tasha had told him settling into his bones like winter cold. "She just had babies, Marcus. 3 of them. Damn, good for her. I always liked her. She was real, you know? Not like those other women your father kept parading around." "Did you talk to her?" "The babies are mine." The silence that followed was so complete that James wondered if the call had dropped. He could picture Marcus in his hospital bed, probably staring at the ceiling and trying to process information that didn't fit into any normal framework. "Come again?" 5 years ago when she disappeared, she was pregnant, with my children, triplets." "Jesus Christ, James." Marcus's voice was suddenly sharp, the morphine fog burning off under the heat of shock. "You have kids? 3 kids, and you didn't know?" My father threatened her, made her disappear. Each word felt like swallowing glass. "She's been raising them alone for 5 years while I thought she'd just gotten tired of me." "Your father?" Marcus had known the Walker family long enough to understand the implications. "That manipulative bastard. What are you going to do?" It was the question James had been avoiding, the one that required him to choose between the life he'd built and the life he'd unknowingly lost. He watched a young father emerge from the hospital, cradling a newborn like it was made of spun glass, his face glowing with the kind of joy James had never thought he'd experience. "I don't know yet." "Well, you better figure it out fast. You've got 5 years of birthday parties to make up for." After hanging up, James found himself walking the streets of Manhattan without any real destination. His feet carried him past boutiques where women browsed for baby clothes, past playgrounds where toddlers chased each other with infectious laughter, past coffee shops where young mothers pushed strollers while balancing laptops and attempting to reclaim pieces of their pre-baby lives. He ended up at Central Park, sitting on a bench near the carousel, watching children shriek with delight as painted horses carried them in endless circles. A little boy with dark hair was riding a white horse, his small hands gripping the brass pole with determined concentration. For a moment, James imagined it was Noah. Imagined teaching his son to ride a real horse at the family estate in Connecticut. Imagined all the moments that had been stolen from both of them. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Bored. Meeting moved to 6 p.m. New acquisition papers need your signature. 3 interviews scheduled for tomorrow morning." The corporate world kept spinning, demanding his attention, pulling him back toward the life of controlled chaos he'd mastered. But for the first time in years, none of it seemed important. Numbers on a spreadsheet couldn't compete with the memory of Noah's blue-gray eyes, Isabella's tiny fingers, Sophia's soft breathing. He found himself in a baby boutique on Madison Avenue, surrounded by soft pastels and the kind of luxury infant accessories that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The saleswoman, clearly recognizing quality when she saw it, approached with the practiced smile of someone who dealt with wealthy parents on a daily basis. "Looking for something special? Perhaps for your own little one?" "3 little ones," James said quietly, running his fingers over an impossibly soft cashmere blanket. "They're new." "How wonderful. Triplets are such a blessing. Are you thinking practical or sentimental?" He bought everything. Blankets, onesies, tiny shoes that would fit in the palm of his hand, soft toys that played gentle lullabies. The saleswoman's eyes lit up with each addition to his growing pile, but James barely noticed the numbers on the receipt. Money had always been just numbers to him, a way of keeping score in a game he'd been raised to win. But this felt different. This felt like love translated into action, like 5 years of missed Christmases condensed into shopping bags. As he loaded the purchases into his car, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made his stomach clench with familiar dread. "Father." "James, I trust your friend is recovering well from his surgery?" Even now, even after everything Tasha had revealed, his father's voice carried that tone of absolute authority, the assumption that his word was law and his judgment was final. "He's fine." "Good. I need you back in Connecticut tonight. The Patterson deal requires your personal attention, and your mother is hosting the charity board dinner Thursday. Your presence is expected." James looked up at the hospital rising before him, at the windows that might be Mary's room, at the building that contained his children, and felt something shift inside him like tectonic plates finding new alignment. "I won't be coming home tonight, Father." The pause was brief but loaded with decades of expectation and disappointment. "I beg your pardon?" "I said I won't be coming home. I have something more important to take care of." "More important than—" "Much more important." James's voice was steady, calm, but underneath it was steel that had been 5 years in the forging. "We need to talk, Father." About Mary Evans. About threats and intimidation, and the 3 grandchildren you've never met. This time the silence stretched long enough for James to hear his father's breathing change, to sense the moment when Richard Walker realized that his carefully constructed house of cards was finally starting to collapse. I see. And where? Exactly. Do you propose we have this conversation? James smiled for the first time in hours, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Room 708, Manhattan General Hospital. Tomorrow morning at 10, don't be late. 10 o'clock came like an execution, precise, inevitable, and charged with the weight of years. Mary sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, trying to focus on feeding Isabella while her world threatened to tilt off its axis. Tasha had warned her about the impending confrontation, had offered to stay and provide moral support. But Mary had declined. Some battles had to be fought alone, especially when they involved the man who had shaped her life by trying to destroy it. She heard them before she saw them, expensive shoes clicking against linoleum in a rhythm that spoke of power and entitlement. Richard Walker III moved through the world like he owned it, and in many ways he did. Old Connecticut money, political connections that reached into Washington, and the kind of influence that could make inconvenient people disappear from society without leaving a trace. James appeared in the doorway first, his jaw set in a way that reminded Mary painfully of the stubborn boy she'd fallen in love with. Behind him came the man who had haunted her nightmares for 5 years. Tall, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, and radiating the cold authority of someone who had never been told no. "Hello, Mary." Richard's voice was silk over steel, polite, on the surface but with undertones that made her skin crawl. "You're looking well, motherhood suits you." Mary shifted Isabella protectively against her chest, her honey-colored eyes meeting his without flinching. "Mr. Walker, may we?" Richard gestured toward the chairs with the casual entitlement of a man who expected the world to rearrange itself for his convenience. "Actually, no." Mary's voice was quiet but firm. "You may not sit. You weren't invited here. James was. The only reason I'm tolerating your presence is because he insisted on having this conversation now instead of somewhere more private." James moved to stand beside her bed, his proximity both comforting and terrifying. "Mary, I need you to tell him. I need him to hear from you what he did." Richard's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "James, surely we can discuss family matters without involving the mother of my children?" James's voice cut through his father's words like a blade. "Without involving the woman you threatened and terrorized into disappearing from my life? I protected you." Richard's tone was reasonable, paternal, the voice of a man explaining simple facts to a slow child. "From a gold digger who would have trapped you with an unwanted pregnancy and ruined your future." Mary felt something hot and dangerous rise in her chest. 5 years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. "Unwanted by whom exactly? I never asked James for money. I never asked for anything except the chance to tell him he was going to be a father. A father to bastard children who would have destroyed his reputation. They're not bastards." The words came out low and deadly, vibrating with maternal fury. "They're beautiful, innocent children who deserve to know their father. Children who spent 5 years asking why they didn't have a daddy like other kids. Children who..." Her voice broke and she had to stop, had to breathe, had to remember that Isabella was still in her arms and needed her to be strong. James stepped closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not quite touching. "Tell him about the lawyers, Mary. Tell him about the threats." Richard straightened his already perfect posture, his expression shifting from paternal concern to something harder, more calculating. "I offered her a generous settlement to avoid complications. When she refused, I simply made it clear that pursuing a relationship with you would be inadvisable. You threatened to take her children away." James's voice was barely controlled. "You had papers drawn up to challenge her fitness as a mother before they were even born. I had contingency plans prepared to protect our family's interests. Standard procedure." Mary looked up at this man who had shaped so much of her life. Through his absence, This stranger who shared her children's blood but not their humanity. Standard procedure? Is that what you call terrorizing a pregnant woman, having me followed, investigating my family like we were criminals? Your brother's arrest record was a matter of public. My brother was 16 when he shoplifted. A candy bar. Mary's voice rose, causing Noah to stir in his bassinet. She immediately lowered it, but the fury remained. He's a social worker now, helping kids like he used to be. But you twisted that into evidence that I was unfit to raise children. Richard waved a dismissive hand. Details are irrelevant. The point is that you made the right choice in the end. James has built an empire, made connections that will serve him for life. Your departure allowed him to become the man he was meant to be. The man he was meant to be? Mary's laugh was sharp, bitter. You mean the man you wanted him to be? Isolated, controlled, living his life according to your schedule and your priorities. James had gone very still beside her, his breathing carefully controlled. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with something that made Richard take an involuntary step backward. She's right. I became exactly what you wanted. Successful, ruthless, empty. 5 years of thinking the woman I loved had abandoned me because I wasn't enough. 5 years of believing that everyone eventually leaves, so why bother investing in anything real? James, I'm not finished. The authority in James's voice was absolute, learned from his father but tempered with something Richard had never possessed. Genuine strength born from genuine pain. You stole 5 years from me. 5 years of knowing my children, of watching them grow, of being there for Mary when she needed me most. He moved closer to Richard, and Mary could see the family resemblance clearly now. The same strong jaw, the same commanding presence. But where Richard's power came from fear and manipulation, James's came from something deeper. You want to know what those 5 years cost me? They cost me my son's first word, my daughter's first steps. They cost me the chance to hold Mary's hand during labor, to cut the umbilical cords, to count fingers and toes and fall in love all over again. They cost me the right to be the man I should have been. Richard's composed mask was cracking now, revealing something almost desperate underneath. I gave you everything, the company, the connections, the foundation for a dynasty. You gave me a prison. James's voice was quiet now, final. And I'm done serving my sentence. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sounds of the baby's breathing. Innocent lives caught in the crossfire of decades of family dysfunction. Richard looked around the room, at the modest hospital accommodations, at Mary, holding her daughter with fierce protectiveness, at James standing like a guardian between his past and his future. And Mary saw the exact moment when he realized he had lost. If you do this, he said quietly, if you choose this path, there will be consequences. The board, the investors, your mother, let them come. James's voice was steady, certain. I'm not afraid of consequences anymore. Richard straightened, his tie with hands that weren't quite steady, his practiced composure reassembling itself like armor. Very well. But don't come crying to me when reality sets in and you realize what you've thrown away. He turned toward the door, then paused. And James, when this fantasy crumbles and you need the family business to fall back on, remember that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. As his footsteps faded down the corridor, Mary realized she had been holding her breath. The man who had terrorized her was gone, but the damage he'd caused would take years to heal. James sank into the chair beside her bed, his head in his hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mary. For all of it. Mary looked down at Isabella, then at Noah and Sophia sleeping peacefully in their bassinets, then back at the man who had just chosen them over everything he'd been raised to value. I know, she whispered. I know you are. But sorry, she realized, was just the beginning. The silence after Richard's departure felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. Mary adjusted Isabella's blanket with trembling fingers, her body still vibrating with the adrenaline of confrontation. 5 years she'd imagined this moment, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in nightmares. But reality was messier, more complicated than any scenario her mind had conjured. James remained in the chair beside her bed, his expensive suit wrinkled now, his perfect composure cracked open to reveal the broken man underneath. He stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else, and Mary found herself studying his profile, the same strong jawline she traced in her children's faces every day, the same stubborn set to his shoulders that Isabella displayed when she didn't want to sleep. "Your mother," Mary said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. "He mentioned your mother. She's going to hate me even more now." James looked up, his blue-gray eyes raw with emotion. "She never hated you. She was just trained not to see you." Same result. Mary shifted Noah when he made soft fussing sounds, her movements automatic after 5 years of solo parenting. "The whole family will blame me for breaking up the dynasty. There is no dynasty without you." The words came out fierce, certain. "There's just money and misery, and people pretending to be happy in houses too big to feel like home." Mary wanted to believe him, wanted to let hope bloom in her chest like spring after a brutal winter. But 5 years of raising 3 children alone had taught her to be practical, to prepare for disappointment, to protect herself and her babies from beautiful lies. "You say that now," she said, her voice gentle but guarded. "But when the board starts pressuring you, when the investors pull out, when your entire life as you know it starts falling apart." It already fell apart. James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "5 years ago, when you disappeared, it fell apart. I just spent all this time trying to put together a puzzle with half the pieces missing." A soft knock interrupted them. Tasha peered around the door, carrying a cardboard tray with 4 coffee cups and wearing an expression that somehow managed to be both cautious and fiercely protective. "Thought you might need fuel," she said, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for emotional casualties. "The good stuff from that place on 3rd Street, not hospital coffee." She handed Mary a cup, the rich aroma immediately transporting her back to simpler times, to Saturday mornings in James's penthouse, when the world felt manageable and love seemed enough to conquer anything. "Thank you," Mary whispered, wrapping her hands around the warm cup like an anchor. Tasha offered a cup to James, studying his face with the intensity of someone who'd spent years picking up the pieces of Mary's broken heart. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," James admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Good. You should." Tasha settled into the remaining chair, her presence both comforting and slightly intimidating. "Mary, the discharge papers are ready whenever you want to leave. Dr. Rodriguez said the babies are cleared to go home." Home. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications none of them were ready to address. Mary's small apartment in Brooklyn, with its cramped rooms and hand-me-down furniture, was home for her and the babies. But James, where did James fit in that picture? "I've been thinking," James said quietly, his voice careful, tentative. "About practical things, support, custody arrangements, making sure you and the babies have everything you need." Mary's stomach tightened. Here it came. The lawyer-mediated, contract-negotiated approach to parenting that she'd always feared from his world. "I don't need your money, James. I know you don't need it, but the children deserve it. College funds, health care, opportunities. They deserve their father more than they deserve trust funds." The words came out sharper than she intended, years of independent struggle making her defensive. "I've given them everything they needed for 5 years without any help from Walker money. And you've been incredible." James set down his coffee, his expression earnest. "But you shouldn't have had to do it alone. You shouldn't have to keep doing it alone." Tasha cleared her throat, her voice carefully neutral. "Maybe we should focus on the immediate future, like where everyone's sleeping, tonight." It was such a practical question, but it opened up a chasm of uncertainty. Mary looked around the hospital room that had been her sanctuary for a week, then at James, who clearly hadn't thought past the confrontation with his father. "I have a hotel suite," he said hesitantly. "The penthouse at the plaza, plenty of Space, room service, whatever you need. I can't stay at the plaza with 3 newborns, Mary interrupted, the idea almost laughable. James, I nurse every 2 hours. The babies cry at all hours. I haven't slept more than 90 minutes straight in a week. Your world of luxury hotels and quiet sophistication isn't compatible with real babies. She saw something flicker across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or the realization that good intentions couldn't bridge the gap between his life and hers. Then I'll come to your place, he said simply. Mary nearly choked on her coffee. My apartment is 400 square feet. There's barely room for me and 3 cribs, let alone. I don't care about space, I care about time. James's voice was quiet but determined. I've missed 5 years, Mary. I've missed everything. I don't want to miss another day. Tasha looked. Between them, her expression unreadable. You know what? I'm going to step outside and call work. Tell them I'm taking another personal day. You two need to figure some things out. After she left, the room felt smaller, more intimate. Mary could hear the city humming outside the window, could smell James's cologne mixing with the antiseptic hospital air, could feel the weight of 5 years of separation pressing down on them like gravity. I'm scared, she admitted quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Of me? Of hoping. She looked down at Isabella, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. I built a life around not hoping for you to come back. I taught myself to be enough for them, to be both parents, to not need anyone. And now you're here, and you're saying all the right things, but you don't trust me not to leave again. You left before without knowing you were leaving. What happens when it gets hard? When the babies are screaming at 3 a.m. and you have a board meeting at 8? When you realize that this life, diapers and sleepless nights and living, paycheck to paycheck, isn't the fairy tale you thought it would be? James was quiet for a long moment, watching Noah sleep with an expression of wonder and terror. Can I hold him? Mary's breath caught. It was such a simple request, but it felt monumental. She looked at James's large hands, manicured and soft from a life of privilege, and tried to imagine them changing diapers, warming bottles, soothing a crying infant at midnight. He's sleeping. Please. The word held 5 years of longing, of missed moments, of a man reaching across an impossible divide toward something he'd never thought he'd have. Mary studied his face, looking for signs of the old James, the one who'd been molded by expectation and intimidated by his father's shadow. Instead, she saw something new, raw determination, terrifying vulnerability, and love so fierce it took her breath away. Slowly, carefully, she transferred Noah into his father's arms. James went completely still, his eyes wide with amazement as he cradled his son for the first time. Noah stirred slightly, then settled against his father's chest with a soft sigh, as if he belonged there. He's so small, James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. So perfect. Mary watched them together, her son and the man she'd never stopped loving, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not her heart. Breaking, but her walls crumbling, hope trickling in like light through a window she'd kept shuttered for too long. His middle name is Alexander, she said quietly. After you. James looked up, tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. Mary, Noah Alexander Evans, Isabella Grace Evans, Sophia Rose Evans. She touched each baby as she spoke their names. I couldn't give them your last name, but I could give them pieces of you. And in that moment, holding his son while the woman he'd never stopped loving watched with cautious hope in her honey-colored eyes, James Walker finally understood what he'd been missing. It wasn't the dynasty his father had built. It was the family he'd never known he'd lost. Mary's apartment in Brooklyn felt like stepping into another universe. James stood in the narrow hallway holding a car seat in each hand while Mary juggled Noah and a diaper bag that had seen better days. The building was pre-war, with creaky wooden floors and radiators that clanged like ghosts in the walls. Paint peeled slightly around the window frames, and the elevator made sounds that suggested it was held together by prayer and determination. "Fourth floor," Mary said, shifting Noah to her hip as she searched for her keys. "The elevator works most of the time, but the stairs are probably safer with the babies." James looked at the narrow staircase with its worn banister and dim lighting, then at the 3 infant car seats they needed to transport. In his world, problems like this were solved by staff. Someone else carried the heavy things. Someone else figured out logistics. Here, Mary had been doing it all alone. "I've got them," he said, adjusting his grip on the carriers. "Lead the way." By the second floor, his expensive shoes were scuffed and his designer shirt was damp with sweat. By the third floor, he understood why Mary had developed the lean strength he'd noticed in her shoulders. By the fourth floor, he was questioning every soft moment of his privileged life. "Here we are," Mary said, finally finding her keys. "Home sweet home." The apartment was exactly what she'd warned him about. Small, cramped, but filled with the kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. 3 cribs dominated the main room, arranged around a rocking chair that looked like it had been inherited from someone's grandmother. The walls were covered with ultrasound photos, preparation lists written in Mary's careful handwriting, and a dozen parenting books, with corners worn from frequent reference. James set down the car seats and looked around, trying to process this space where his children had been prepared for, dreamed about, planned for without him. A changing table was set up with military precision, diapers stacked by size, wipes within easy reach, everything organized for efficiency by a woman who'd known she'd be doing it all herself. "It's not much," Mary said, her voice carrying the defensive pride of someone who'd made something from nothing. "But it's safe and it's clean and it's perfect." James turned to face her, his expression serious. "Mary, this is perfect. You've built a home for them." She looked surprised by his sincerity, as if she'd been bracing for criticism or pity. "The rent's affordable, and Mrs. Chen downstairs loves babies. She's been saving hand-me-down clothes for months." James walked to the window, which offered a view of the building's small courtyard where someone had planted a tiny garden among the trash bins. Below, children played on a makeshift swing set while their parents watched from folding chairs, creating community from concrete and hope. "Tell me about your life here," he said quietly. "The real parts, not just the logistics." Mary began unloading the babies from their car seats, her movements automatic and efficient. "I work night shifts at Brooklyn Methodist. Mrs. Chen watches them when I sleep during the day and I pay her what I can. Tasha comes by most evenings, brings dinner, helps with baths." She placed Isabella in one of the cribs, where the baby immediately settled against a worn, stuffed elephant. "We have routines. Story time at 7, even though they're too young to understand. Tummy time on the rug by the window because the light is good there. Sometimes I sing to them, the same songs my mother sang to me." James watched her move around the small space with practiced grace, every action deliberate and loving. "What do you sing?" Mary paused, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Old lullabies mostly. Sometimes I make up songs about their day. What they ate, how long they slept. Silly things that probably don't make sense to anyone else." "Sing something now." She looked at him like he'd asked her to perform brain surgery. "James, I can't. Just, please, I want to know what they hear when you sing to them." For a moment, Mary just stood there, vulnerable and self-conscious. Then Sophia started to fuss and Mary's maternal instincts took over. She lifted her daughter from the car seat and began to sway gently, her voice soft and clear. Sophia rose. "My little star, you're perfect just the way you are. Daddy's here, though it took him time to find his way back to this rhyme." James felt something break open in his chest. The song was simple, improvised, probably created in this very moment, but it contained more love than anything he'd ever heard. He watched Mary cradle their daughter, watched Sophia's eyes flutter closed at the sound of her mother's voice, and realized he was witnessing something sacred. "You gave them music," he said when the song ended. "Even without me, you gave them music and stories and love." "I gave them what I could." Mary's voice was quiet, tired. "But I couldn't give them a father. I couldn't give them bedtime stories about where Daddy was or why he wasn't here. I couldn't give them that. James moved closer, his expensive cologne oddly out of place in the small apartment, but somehow not unwelcome. What did you tell them? When they get older? When they start asking questions? I practiced 100 different speeches. Mary settled into the rocking chair, Sophia still in her arms. I was going to tell them that their father was a good man who didn't know they existed, that sometimes life gets complicated, but it doesn't mean people don't love each other. And now? Mary looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes reflecting years of hope and disappointment, of strength built from necessity and dreams deferred. Now I don't know what to tell them. How do I explain that their father is here, that he wants to be part of their lives, but that the world he comes from tried to erase us? James knelt beside the rocking chair, bringing himself to her eye level. You tell them the truth. You tell them that their father was stupid and blind and let other people make decisions for him. You tell them that he's here now and he's not going anywhere. But how do I believe that? The question came out like a whisper, like a confession. How do I trust that this isn't just guilt or some misguided sense of obligation? How do I know you won't wake up in 6 months and realize that this life, our life, isn't what you really want? Before James could answer, Noah started crying in his crib, followed immediately by Isabella. The sound was jarring in the small space, but Mary's response was immediate and calm. She passed Sophia to James, who took her with hands that were getting steadier each time, and moved to comfort the other babies. This is what I mean, Mary said as she lifted Noah, her voice raised slightly over the crying. This is reality. 2 a.m. feedings and diaper blowouts and babies who cry for no reason. This isn't romantic or glamorous or anything like the life you're used to. James looked down at Sophia, who was staring up at him with serious blue-gray eyes that mirrored his own. Her tiny hand had worked free from her blanket and was waving in the air like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. I don't want the life I'm used to, he said quietly. I want this. Mary paused in her bouncing of Noah, looking at James with an expression caught between hope and disbelief. You say that now, but nothing. James stood carefully, Sophia still in his arms, and moved to help with Isabella. Mary, I've spent 5 years living in a penthouse that felt like a tomb. I've had every luxury imaginable and felt empty. Every single day. This chaos, this noise, this beautiful mess. This is the first time I've felt alive since you disappeared. The babies gradually settled as both parents worked to comfort them, and in the sudden quiet, James's phone started ringing. He glanced at the screen. Board member Harrison Cromwell, probably calling about the fallout from this morning's confrontation with his father. Without hesitation, James declined the call and turned off his phone. The corporate world is going to come looking for you, Mary warned, settling back into the rocking chair with Noah. They're not going to just let you walk away from everything. Let them come. James's voice was steady, certain. I spent 35 years being the son my father wanted. Maybe it's time I figured out who I actually am. Mary studied his face, in the soft afternoon light filtering through her small windows, looking for cracks in his resolve, for signs that this was temporary madness that would burn out when reality set in. Instead, she saw something that made her heart skip. James Walker, CEO and heir to a corporate dynasty, sitting on her second-hand couch in his wrinkled designer clothes, holding their daughter like she was made of spun gold, looking more at peace than she'd ever seen him. Okay, she said quietly, the word carrying the weight of 5 years of caution finally giving way to possibility. Okay? Stay. Try this. Be their father. Mary's voice grew stronger with each word. But James, if you're going to be here, be all the way here. Don't keep one foot in your old life just in case this doesn't work out. James looked around the small apartment that would become his new world. At the cribs and changing table and rocking chair. At the woman who had built a life of love from nothing but determination. At the 3 babies who had his eyes and her strength. I'm all the way here, he said, And for the first time in 5 years, he meant something completely. 3 weeks into his new life, James discovered that love was equal parts magic and exhaustion. At 3:17 a.m., he stood in Mary's tiny kitchen warming a bottle while Sophia screamed in his arms with the kind of lung capacity that seemed impossible for someone who weighed less than 8 pounds. His designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and t-shirts that could survive spit-up, and his perfectly groomed beard now bore traces of baby formula from an earlier feeding mishap. "Shh, sweetheart," he murmured, swaying gently as he tested the bottle temperature on his wrist. "I know you're hungry. Daddy's trying his best here." Daddy. The word still felt foreign on his tongue, but less so every day. Each diaper change, each successful burping, each moment when one of the babies settled peacefully in his arms added weight to the title, made it more real. Mary appeared in the doorway, her hair in a messy bun and wearing the kind of exhausted expression that had become their shared uniform. "Isabella's finally back down. How's our little night owl?" "Demanding. Just like her mother." James smiled as he said it, offering Mary the kind of teasing affection that had slowly been rebuilding between them over the past few weeks. "I was never demanding," Mary protested, taking the bottle and settling into the rocking chair with Sophia. "I was persuasive. You convinced me to sneak into the Natural History Museum after hours for a private tour of the planetarium. That was romantic. That was breaking and entering." Mary laughed softly, the sound mixing with Sophia's contented feeding noises. Best first date ever, though. These moments of ease had been growing more frequent. Shared smiles over coffee, hands briefly touching as they passed babies back and forth, the comfortable rhythm of two people learning to be a team again. But James could see the caution in Mary's eyes, the way she still flinched slightly when he mentioned long-term plans as if she was waiting for him to remember his real life and disappear, the real life that had been calling with increasing urgency. His phone, which he'd taken to leaving in the kitchen to avoid disturbing the babies, buzzed against the counter. James glanced at the screen. 17 missed calls from his assistant, 43 unread emails, and a text from his mother that simply read, "We need to talk." "They're getting persistent," Mary observed, nodding toward the phone. "They can wait." "James, you can't ignore your entire life indefinitely. The company, your responsibilities, my responsibilities are here." He gestured around the small apartment where they'd created a bubble of domestic chaos and unexpected joy. "With you, with them." Mary shifted Sophia to her shoulder for burping, her expression troubled. "But for how long? Eventually, you're going to have to deal with the fallout from walking away." As if summoned by her words, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. James and Mary froze, looking at each other with the kind of terror that comes from being woken too many times by crying babies. "It's almost 4 a.m., Mary whispered. "Who would—" The knock came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice that made James's blood run cold. "James Alexander Walker III, I know you're in there. Open this door immediately." His mother. Eleanor Walker had somehow tracked him to Brooklyn, to this small apartment where he'd been hiding from his responsibilities like a teenager avoiding homework. "How did she find us?" Mary's voice was barely audible, but James could hear the old fear creeping back in, the same terror his father had instilled 5 years ago. "Private investigators, probably. Or she had my phone tracked." James ran his hands through his hair, his peaceful world suddenly feeling fragile as glass. "Mary, I can send her away." "You don't have to—" "Open the door, James, or I'll have the building superintendent do it for me." Mary looked down at Sophia, then toward the cribs where Noah and Isabella were somehow still sleeping despite the commotion. "Let her in. Better to face this now than have her wake the whole building." James opened the door to find his mother standing in the hallway like a force of nature contained in a Chanel suit. Eleanor Walker was 62 years old, perfectly preserved through the kind of medical care that money could buy, and radiating the cold fury of a woman whose carefully ordered world had been disrupted. "Mother. Don't mother me." She swept past him into the apartment, her critical gaze taking in the cramped space, the baby equipment, the evidence of his new life. 3 weeks, James. 3 weeks of phone calls that go straight to voicemail, meetings you don't attend, responsibilities you've abandoned. I told the board I was taking personal time. Personal time? Eleanor's laugh was sharp, bitter. Is that what we're calling this? You've been playing house with your little nursemaid while your real life falls apart. Don't. James's voice carried a warning that his mother either didn't hear or chose to ignore. The Patterson deal collapsed. The Singapore expansion is in jeopardy. The board is talking about a vote of no confidence. Eleanor's words were precise, calculated to wound. Your father built that company for you, and you're throwing it away for what? Midnight feedings and dirty diapers? Mary had gone very still in the rocking chair. Sophia clutched protectively against her chest. James could see her withdrawing, pulling back into the defensive shell she'd worn for so many years. The company will survive without me, James said quietly. People are more important than profit margins. These aren't people, James. This is a fantasy. Eleanor's gaze fixed on Mary with laser precision. She trapped you once before, and she's doing it again, except this time she's using children as leverage. Get out. James's voice was deadly quiet. Get out of this apartment. Now. I'm trying to save you from yourself. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine concern underneath the manipulation. You think this is love? This chaos, this poverty, this woman who hid your children from you for 5 years? She's not worthy of you, James. She never was. Mary stood slowly, still holding Sophia, her honey-colored eyes bright with unshed tears. When she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the emotion underneath. You're right, Mrs. Walker. I'm not worthy of him. James started to protest, but Mary continued. I'm not worthy of a man who was raised to value stock prices over people, who needs his mother's permission to make decisions about his own life. I'm not worthy of someone who sees loving his children as a burden instead of a gift. Eleanor looked, momentarily taken aback by Mary's quiet dignity. But James isn't that man anymore, Mary continued. The man I fell in love with 7 years ago is still in there, underneath all the expectations and obligations you've piled on him. And if he chooses to stay here, with us, it won't be because I trapped him. It'll be because he finally figured out who he really wants to be. The apartment fell silent except for the soft sounds of the baby's breathing. Eleanor looked around the room, at the evidence of a life built on love instead of money, at her son cradling his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world, at the woman who had somehow found the courage to stand up to her despite everything she'd been through. The board meets Thursday, Eleanor said finally, her voice cold but resigned. If you're not there, if you don't vote to approve the Henderson merger, they'll move forward with the vote of no confidence. Then they'll move forward, James said, simply. Eleanor's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. This is your legacy, James. Everything your father worked for, everything I sacrificed. This is my legacy. James gestured around the room. My children, my family, my choice to be better than the man you raised me to be. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, as if looking at a stranger. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked toward the wire door, her heels clicking against the worn wooden floor. When this fantasy crumbles, she said without turning around, when you realize what you've thrown away, don't expect me to clean up the mess. After she left, the apartment felt smaller somehow, as if the confrontation had sucked all the oxygen from the room. Mary sank back into the rocking chair, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted Sophia's blanket. She's right about one thing, Mary said quietly. This is going to cost you everything. James moved to kneel beside her chair, his hands covering hers. Everything I had before was empty. This is everything that matters. The company, your inheritance, your entire identity, was built on other people's expectations. James's voice was firm, certain. Mary, I spent 35 years being who they wanted me to be. I'm done. Mary looked down at Sophia, then at Noah and Isabella, who had somehow slept through the entire confrontation. And if you regret it? If you wake up one day and realize you gave up too much? James tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. The only thing I regret is the 5 years I lost with you. The 5 years when these babies needed their father and I wasn't here because I was too blind to see past my family's manipulation. James, I love you. The words came out raw, desperate. I love you, I love them, and I choose this. Not because I'm trapped or manipulated or running away from responsibility. Because this is the only life worth living. Mary stared at him, searching his face. For doubt, for cracks in his resolve. Instead, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. Not the polished CEO or the dutiful son, but the person underneath all of that. The one who'd once broken into a museum just to show her the stars. I love you too, she whispered. I never stopped. And as dawn broke over Brooklyn, painting the small apartment in soft golden light, James realized that sometimes the most important revolutions happened quietly, in cramped spaces, between people, brave enough to choose love over legacy. But outside, his old world was already planning its counterattack. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning while James was learning to master the art of simultaneous bottle feeding. He had Noah cradled in his left arm, Isabella in his right, both babies drinking contentedly while Sophia dozed in her bouncy seat nearby. Mary was finally getting her first real sleep in days, curled up on the couch with exhaustion etched into every line of her face. This was his life now. Coordinated feeding schedules, the gentle art of burping without waking sleeping siblings, the profound satisfaction of being needed in the most basic, essential way. The corporate world felt like something from another lifetime, a movie he'd watched but never actually lived. Until his phone rang with Dr. Rodriguez's number from the hospital. Mr. Walker, I'm sorry to call so early, but we need you and Ms. Evans to bring Noah in immediately. James felt his blood turn to ice. What's wrong? Is he sick? His recent blood work showed some irregularities that need immediate attention. How quickly can you get here? James looked down at Noah, who was finishing his bottle with the same serious concentration he brought to everything. His son looked perfect. Pink cheeks, bright eyes, tiny fingers that gripped James's thumb with surprising strength. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Mary was awake instantly when he shook her shoulder, maternal instinct overriding exhaustion. What happened? What's wrong? Noah needs to go back to the hospital. Dr. Rodriguez wouldn't say why over the phone. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic preparation, packing diaper bags, arranging emergency childcare with Mrs. Chen for Isabella and Sophia, the terrifying taxi ride through morning traffic while Noah slept peacefully in his car seat, oblivious to his parents' panic. Dr. Rodriguez met them in the pediatric wing, her expression carefully professional but kind. Thank you for coming so quickly. Noah's blood work from his 1-week checkup showed elevated levels that suggest a possible heart condition. Mary's face went white. Heart condition? It's called patent ductus arteriosus, a blood vessel that should have closed after birth, remains open. In many cases, it closes on its own, but Noah's appears to be significant enough to require surgical intervention. James felt the words hit him like physical blows. Surgery. His 5-week-old son needed surgery. Is it dangerous? Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. It's a relatively common procedure, but it does require a pediatric cardiac specialist. The surgery would need to happen at Mount Sinai. And the cost? Dr. Rodriguez hesitated. The cost could be substantial. Do you have insurance coverage? Mary's silence was answer enough. As a part-time night nurse, her insurance was minimal, designed to cover basic care but not major surgery. James watched her face as the reality sank in. Her son needed an operation that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she had no way to pay for it. I'll cover it, James said immediately. Whatever it costs, insurance or no insurance, I'll pay for everything. Dr. Rodriguez looked relieved. That's wonderful. I'll have my office coordinate with Mount Sinai immediately. Time is important here. Ideally, we want to schedule this within the next few days. After she left them alone with Noah, Mary, sank into the uncomfortable hospital chair and buried her face in her hands. James could see her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 5 years of handling everything alone finally overwhelming her in the face of something she couldn't control. "He's going to be okay," James said, kneeling beside her chair. "Mary, he's going to be fine." "You don't know that." Her voice was muffled, broken. "He's so small, James. He's so tiny. And they want to cut open his heart. And what if something goes wrong? What if nothing's going wrong?" James pulled her hands away from her face, forcing her to look at him. "Nothing is going wrong because we're going to make sure he gets the best possible care. The best surgeon, the best hospital, whatever he needs." Mary's honey-colored eyes were bright with tears and something else. A fierce, desperate love that would move mountains to protect her child. "I can't lose him, James. I can't lose any of them. They're everything to me. They're everything to me, too." The words came out with surprising force, surprising truth. "Mary, 5 weeks ago I didn't even know they existed. Now I can't imagine a world without them, without any of you." A soft knock interrupted them. James looked up to see a woman in an expensive suit standing in the doorway. Rebecca Martinez, his former assistant, looking uncomfortable and out of place in the pediatric ward. "Mr. Walker, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this couldn't wait." James stood slowly, his body language shifting into the protective stance he'd perfected over the past weeks. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" "The board voted this morning. No confidence, unanimous decision. They're moving forward with the hostile takeover by Henderson Industries." Rebecca's voice was professional, but James could see the sympathy in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." The words should have devastated him. 5 generations of Walker family business gone. His inheritance, his identity, his entire legacy, erased by a board vote he hadn't been there to prevent. Instead, he felt nothing but a strange sense of relief. "Thank you for letting me know," he said simply. Rebecca looked confused by his calm reaction. "Sir, Mr. Henderson is demanding an immediate transition meeting. Your father is asking if you'll reconsider." "No." James's voice was firm, final. "Tell my father that I'm exactly where I need to be." After Rebecca left, Mary stared at him with an expression of shock and disbelief. "James, your company is gone. Everything your family built." "Everything my family built was hollow." James sat beside her, taking Noah from her arms and cradling his son against his chest. "This is what matters. This little guy who needs surgery, and Isabella's smile when I change her diaper, and Sophia's grip on my finger. This is real, Mary. Everything else was just paper and pretense. But your future, your security, my future is right here." James looked down at Noah, who was staring up at him with those serious blue-gray eyes. "I'll figure out the rest. I'll get a job, learn to live on a budget, do whatever it takes to support our family. Our family." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Mary reached over to touch Noah's tiny hand. "The surgery is going to cost. I still have my personal accounts, investments my father can't touch. Noah's going to have the best cardiac surgeon in the country, and we're going to get through this together." Together? James looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had carried his children through 5 years of struggle, who had built a life of love from nothing but determination, who was facing her worst nightmare with the kind of grace that humbled him. "Mary Evans, will you marry me?" The question came out of nowhere, surprising even him. But as soon as he said it, James knew it was right. Not because of the babies, not because of obligation or guilt or any of the complicated emotions that had brought them back together. Because he loved her. Because she was his anchor, his home, his reason for becoming the man he was supposed to be. Mary stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "James, you just lost everything." "I found everything." He shifted Noah to one arm so he could take her hand. "I found you, I found them, I found myself. The rest is just noise." "But I'm not. I don't have a ring or a dress or any of the things. I don't care about things, I care about us. About building something real together. something that can't be taken away by board votes or family pressure. James's voice grew stronger with each word. Mary, you saved me. You saved me from becoming my father, from living a life that looked perfect from the outside but was empty at the core. Mary looked down at Noah, then back at James, searching his face for doubt or hesitation. Instead, she saw love. Not the desperate, possessive love of their youth, but something deeper, tested by loss and strengthened by choice. Yes, she whispered. Yes. I'll marry you. They kissed then, softly, carefully, mindful of the baby, between them, but unable to resist the pull of 5 years of separation finally ending. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. They were both exhausted, stressed about Noah's surgery, sitting in an uncomfortable hospital chair. But it was real. When they broke apart, James rested his forehead against hers. We're going to get through this. The surgery, the recovery, building a new life together. All of it. Together, Mary agreed, the word carrying the weight of promises made and kept, of love that had survived separation and would survive whatever came next. Outside the window, New York City hummed with its usual chaos, indifferent to the small miracles and quiet revolutions happening in its hospitals and apartments. But in room 314 of Manhattan General's pediatric wing, 3 people who had lost everything and found each other were planning a future built on something stronger than money or legacy. They were building it on love. And sometimes love was enough to move mountains, or at least to face whatever mountains needed moving. The waiting room at Mount Sinai's pediatric cardiac unit felt like purgatory painted in cheerful pastels. James paced the small space like a caged animal, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, his clothes wrinkled from a sleepless night. Beside him, Mary sat motionless in an uncomfortable chair, her arms wrapped around herself as if she could physically hold her heart together through sheer will. Noah had been in surgery for 3 hours. 3 hours of watching the clock move with agonizing slowness, of jumping every time someone in scrubs walked past, of imagining every possible outcome except the one where their son came home healthy and whole. Mr. and Mrs. Evans, a nurse, appeared in the doorway, and Mary's head snapped up with desperate hope. Walker, James corrected automatically, then caught himself. Actually, no, Evans. We're the Evans family. The nurse looked confused for a moment, consulting her chart. I'm sorry, there seems to be some confusion with the paperwork. It doesn't matter, Mary said quietly, standing on unsteady legs. Is he okay? Is Noah okay? Dr. Harrison will be out to speak with you shortly. The procedure went very well. Went well. The words hit James like a physical force, relief so overwhelming it nearly buckled his knees. Mary made a soft sound, half sob, half laugh, and James caught her as she swayed, pulling her against his chest. He's okay, James whispered into her hair. Our boy is okay. They held each other in that sterile waiting room, 2 people who had been through hell and found their way back to each other, finally allowing themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to work out. Dr. Harrison appeared, 20 minutes later, still in surgical scrubs but wearing the kind of smile that meant miracles. The surgery was a complete success. The ductus arteriosus has been closed and Noah's heart function looks excellent. He's a fighter, this little one. Mary's knees actually did give out then, and James guided her back into the chair as happy tears streamed down her face. When can we see him? He's in recovery now. Give us another hour to make sure he's stable, and then you can spend as much time with him as you'd like. After the doctor left, James and Mary sat in stunned silence, holding hands and trying to process the roller coaster of emotions that had brought them to this moment. Relief, exhaustion, overwhelming gratitude, and underneath it all, a love so fierce it could move mountains. I want to get married, Mary said suddenly. James looked at her, startled. Mary, I want to get married, here, now, today. Her voice was strong despite the tears still tracking down her cheeks. I don't want to wait for planning or dress shopping or any of that. I want to marry you while we're still in this moment, while we still remember what it feels like to almost lose everything. James stared at her, This woman who continued to surprise him every day with her strength, her passion, her ability to find joy in the middle of chaos. Mary, are you sure? We could do something proper, with Tasha and James. She turned, to face him fully, her honey-colored eyes blazing with determination. 5 years ago, I thought I'd lost you forever. 3 hours ago, I thought I might lose our son. I don't want to waste another minute waiting for the perfect moment. This is the perfect moment. James felt something shift in his chest. A final, wall crumbling as he looked at this incredible woman who had rebuilt his entire world. Okay. Yes. Let's get married. Really? Really? James stood and pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with sudden purpose. There's a chapel in the hospital, for families who need it during difficult times. I'll call them. An hour later, they stood in Mount Sinai's small interfaith chapel, still wearing the clothes they'd thrown on in panic that morning. Mary held Isabella while James cradled Sophia, and somewhere upstairs Noah was sleeping peacefully in the cardiac unit, surrounded by the best medical care money could buy. The hospital chaplain was a kind woman named Reverend Patricia Williams, who had performed hundreds of bedside ceremonies for families facing crisis. She understood that sometimes love couldn't wait for convenient timing. "Do you have rings?" she asked gently. Mary and James looked at each other, then started laughing, the kind of slightly hysterical laughter that comes after surviving something terrible. "No rings," Mary managed between giggles. "No flowers, no music, no guests except these two." She gestured to the babies in their arms. "Then we'll make our own traditions." Reverend Williams smiled. "James, do you take Mary as your wife, in sickness and health, in the chaos of midnight feedings and the quiet moments between storms?" "I do." James's voice was steady. "Sure. I take her exactly as she is in this moment, in this mess, forever." "And Mary, do you take James as your husband, knowing that he's chosen love over legacy, family over fortune, and that the road ahead won't always be easy?" Mary looked at this man who had given up everything for her, who was holding their daughter like she was made of starlight, who had learned to change diapers and warm bottles and sing improvised lullabies with the same dedication he'd once brought to corporate acquisitions. "I do. I take him as he is now, not the man he was raised to be, but the man he chose to become. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." They kissed over their sleeping daughters, in a hospital chapel that smelled like antiseptic and hope, while somewhere upstairs their son recovered from surgery that had saved his life. It wasn't the wedding either of them had ever imagined, but it was perfect, real, honest, born from the kind of love that could survive anything. After the ceremony, they went straight to the cardiac unit to see Noah. He was awake, alert, and according to the nurses, already showing signs of improved heart function. When James lifted him carefully from his hospital crib, Noah looked up at his father with those serious blue-gray eyes and made a soft, cooing sound that might have been contentment. "Hello, son," James whispered. "Mama and Daddy got married today. We're a real family now." Mary moved to stand beside them, Isabella and Sophia sleeping peacefully in the double stroller. "We were always a real family. We just made it official." They stood there in the cardiac unit, surrounded by beeping monitors and the quiet bustle of medical staff, and James realized that this was the moment his life truly began. Not his birth into privilege, not his first board meeting, not any of the milestones his father had deemed important. This moment when he held his recovering son while his wife, smiled at him with eyes that held 5 years of struggle and a lifetime of love ahead. "So what now?" Mary asked softly. "Where do we go from here?" James looked around the hospital room, then out the window at the New York skyline, where his old life was being dismantled by lawyers and board members. Somewhere out there, his parents were probably still trying to figure out how to bring their prodigal son back into the fold. Somewhere out there, his former colleagues were dividing up his empire and moving on without him. But here, in this room, was everything that mattered. "Now we go home," he said simply. We take our children home and we build something new, something that belongs to us. Home to my 400-square-foot apartment? Mary's smile was teasing but warm. Home to our 400-square-foot apartment, James corrected. Although we might need to start looking for something bigger. Mary laughed, the sound bright and clear in the sterile hospital air. One step at a time, Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans? James raised an eyebrow. Well, we couldn't very well be the Walker family after everything that's happened. And besides, Mary's expression grew soft, serious. I like the idea of us building something completely our own. No dynasties, no expectations, just us. James considered this, rolling the name around in his mind. James Evans. It sounded like freedom. The Evans family, he said, testing it out. I like it. As evening settled over Manhattan, they prepared to take their son home from the hospital for the second time. But this time as a complete family, legally bound and emotionally whole. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but bright with possibility. They would find a bigger apartment in Brooklyn, somewhere with room for 3 growing children and 2 parents learning to navigate marriage in their 30s. James would figure out how to build a career outside the corporate world, maybe something that actually helped people instead of just moving money around. Mary would finish her nursing degree, pursue the dreams she'd put on hold to survive. But all of that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, they were taking their babies home, to a small apartment filled with love and second-hand furniture, and the kind of chaos that comes from choosing each other every single day. As they loaded the children into the taxi, Mary turned to James one more time. Any regrets about giving up everything for this? James looked at his wife, holding their son who would grow up healthy and strong, at the daughters who would never doubt their father's love, at the life they were building from nothing but determination and hope. Everything I gave up was never really mine, he said. This is the first thing I've ever truly owned. And as their taxi pulled away from the hospital and headed toward Brooklyn, toward home, toward a future they would write together, James Evans finally understood what his father had never learned. Some inheritances are worth more than money. Some legacies are measured in love. 3 years later, the community center in Park Slope buzzed with the controlled chaos of a children's birthday party. But this wasn't the kind of lavish celebration that had once defined James's world. Paper streamers hung from basketball hoops, homemade cake sat on folding tables, and the gift pile consisted mostly of books and art supplies wrapped in newspaper comics. James Evans, he'd legally changed his name 2 years ago, stood behind the small stage, adjusting the microphone, while 3-year-old Noah tugged at his jeans. Daddy, when do we start? Noah's voice carried the barely contained excitement of a child who understood that today was special, even if he couldn't quite grasp why. In just a minute, buddy. James lifted his son, his healthy, strong, perfectly healed son, onto his hip. Are you ready to help Daddy tell the story? Noah nodded solemnly, his blue-gray eyes serious in the way that reminded James of himself at that age, but without the weight of expectation that had crushed his own childhood. Across the room, Mary was helping Isabella and Sophia distribute party hats to the dozen children who had gathered for story time. At 3 years old, the girls were developing distinct personalities. Isabella was the natural leader, organizing the other children with gentle authority, while Sophia preferred to observe quietly before jumping into any situation. Mary caught James's eye and smiled, her honey-colored hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the community center's windows. She looked tired. They both did. The exhaustion of working parents who were building something from scratch, but happy in a way that went deeper than surface contentment. Welcome, everyone. James spoke into the microphone, his voice carrying the confidence he'd once used in boardrooms, but warmed now with genuine affection. Thank you for coming to our family's storytelling afternoon. A small cheer went up from the children, most of whom knew James as Mr. Evans, the man who came to their daycare every week to read stories and who somehow made even the simplest tales feel like adventures. Today I want to tell you about a man who thought he had everything but discovered he had nothing at all. James began, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a natural storyteller, and about a woman who had almost nothing but created everything that mattered. In the audience, Tasha Brooks sat with her own 2-year-old daughter, grinning as she watched her best friend's husband weave magic from words. Beside her, Mrs. Chen from the old building dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She'd been following this family's story for years now, had watched love transform them all. The man lived in a tower made of gold and glass, James continued, Noah still perched on his hip. But the tower was empty, cold, and no matter how high it reached, it never touched the sky. The children listened with rapt attention as James told their story, not literally, but in the metaphorical language of fairy tales. The princess who disappeared to protect her treasures, the prince who had to choose between his crown and his heart, the 3 little stars that showed them the way home. Mary found herself wiping away tears as she listened to her husband transform their pain into something beautiful, something that could teach other children about courage and love, and choosing what matters most. And do you know what the man discovered? James asked the assembled children, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. What? They chorused back. He discovered that the greatest treasures aren't made of gold or silver. They're made of love, and laughter, and midnight feedings, and scraped knees that need kissing better. Noah giggled at this, remembering the scraped knee from last week that had required extensive parental attention and 2 Band-Aids. The man learned that being rich isn't about how much money you have in the bank. It's about how many people love you and how many people you love back. After the story, as children ran around the community center and parents chatted over coffee and cake, James found himself standing by the window watching his family. Mary was helping Isabella tie her shoes while Sophia showed off a drawing to anyone who would look. Noah was playing tag with children whose parents worked multiple jobs, whose grandparents spoke Spanish or Korean or Arabic at home, whose families looked nothing like the ones he'd grown up around. Regrets? James turned to find an unexpected visitor, Marcus, his old college roommate, looking slightly out of place in his expensive suit among the community center's cheerful chaos. Marcus, I didn't expect to see you here. Tasha invited me, said I should see what you'd built. Marcus gestured around the room, taking in the multicultural families, the handmade decorations, the genuine warmth that filled the space. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? Honestly? I thought you'd lost your mind, giving up everything for this. Marcus's voice wasn't judgmental, just curious. But watching you up there, seeing your kids, your wife, I think I'm the one who doesn't understand something. James smiled, his gaze returning to his family. I used to think success meant building something bigger than myself. Turns out it means building something better than myself. The company's doing well, you know. Henderson Industries merged everything, streamlined operations. Your father asks about you sometimes. And nothing. I think he knows he lost something irreplaceable, but he doesn't know how to fix it. Marcus paused. Do you ever think about reconciling? James considered this. Over the past 3 years, there had been cards on birthdays, expensive gifts sent through intermediaries, awkward phone calls that went nowhere. His parents were trying, in their limited way, to bridge a gap they didn't really understand. Maybe someday, James said finally, when they're ready to meet the Evans family, instead of trying to reclaim the Walker heir. Mary appeared beside them carrying Sophia, who had chocolate cake in her hair and a sleepy expression that suggested nap time was approaching. Marcus, right? James has told me so much about you. All good things, I hope. Mostly. Mary's smile took the sting out of her words. Thank you for coming. It means a lot to James to have old friends here. Marcus looked between them, this couple who had somehow made a fairy tale out of the wreckage of a dynasty, and James could see the exact moment when understanding dawned. You're really happy, Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. Completely, James replied, wrapping his arm around Mary's waist and accepting Sophia when she reached for him. Marcus, meet my daughter. Sophia, this is Daddy's friend from college. Sophia studied Marcus with the serious consideration she brought to all new encounters. then apparently decided he was acceptable because she offered him a piece of cake from her tiny fist. "She likes you," Mary laughed. "That's rare. Sophia's very particular about people." As the afternoon wound down and families began gathering their children and leftover cake, James helped clean up the community center with the easy efficiency of someone who'd learned that real wealth meant contributing to something larger than yourself. "Same time next month?" asked Carmen Rodriguez, the center's director, as she stacked folding chairs. "Wouldn't miss it," James replied. "The kids voted. They want the story about the dragon who learned to breathe butterflies instead of fire." "You and your stories," Mary shook her head, but her expression was fond. "Come on, storyteller. Let's get these three home before they crash completely." The walk home to their new apartment, a spacious two-bedroom in a converted brownstone, took them through Prospect Park, where early evening light filtered through spring leaves and made everything look touched by magic. James pushed the stroller while Mary walked beside him, their hands linked, the easy rhythm of a couple who had learned to move through the world as a team. "Good day?" Mary asked. "Perfect day." James squeezed her hand. "You know what I was thinking during the story?" "What?" 5 years ago, if someone had told me that my greatest achievement would be making a room full of 3-year-olds believe in happy endings, I would have laughed. And now?" James stopped walking, turning to face her in the golden light of a perfect spring evening. "Now I know that's exactly what it means to change the world. One story at a time, one child at a time, one choice at a time." Mary reached up to straighten his collar, a gesture so domestic, so perfectly ordinary, that it took his breath away with its simple beauty. "I love our life," she said quietly. "Even the chaos, the tight budget, the apartment that's still too small for 5 people, especially those things." Mary's smile was radiant. "Because they're ours, James. We built this together, from nothing but love and stubbornness and the belief that families are made, not inherited." They resumed, walking, their children drowsing in the stroller, their own steps synchronized after years of practice. Behind them, the community center glowed with warm light as other families finished their own celebrations. Ahead of them, their apartment waited with its mismatched furniture and photo-covered walls and the kind of controlled chaos that came from raising 3 active children. And somewhere between those 2 points, between the community they'd found and the home they'd built, James Evans realized that this was what happily ever after actually looked like. Not a mansion or a throne or a corporate empire. Just love, multiplied by time and choice and the courage to build something beautiful from the wreckage of what came before. As they reached their building, Noah stirred in his stroller and looked up at his parents with sleepy eyes. "Daddy, are we home?" James looked at his son, at his wife, at the windows of their apartment where Mrs. Patel from downstairs was probably already starting dinner, and the Johnsons' toddler was practicing his walking in the hallway. "Yes, buddy," he said, lifting Noah from the stroller and feeling the solid, perfect weight of his child in his arms. "We're home." And for the first time in his life, James Evans meant it completely. Realbrin Durkiner the end. What would you choose in a life built on expectations or a love that transforms everything it touches? Your participation means so much to us. Please share your thoughts about this story in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.